What happened at the ballot box this weekend here in North Texas is now making national waves after a rare political upset in a deep red district. Hello and welcome in, everybody. I'm Casey Stiegel. So voters in Tarrant County State Senate District 9 elected a Democrat in last night's special runoff election, a seat that has firmly been held by Republicans now for several decades. 33-year-old Taylor Remett defeating Republican challenger Lee Wamgans by a decisive double-digit margin, 57 to 43%. Remett is an Air Force veteran and local union leader who ran a campaign centered on cost of living pressures, public education, and everyday economic concerns. Wamgans, a longtime Republican activist, focused on conservative priorities. The seat will be on the ballot again in November because this was a special election to fill a vacancy left behind by Kelly Hancock.
Good to see you again. Adam here, let's get into it. Deep Red Texas just delivered a stunning result that has Republican insiders genuinely terrified, not cable news panic, but real, behind closed doors alarm from strategists who understand the electoral math. The political earthquake in the Lone Star State could reshape the entire electoral landscape. Here's what happened that has everyone in Republican circles scrambling to figure out what went wrong. A special election was held for a Texas state Senate seat covering parts of the Fort Worth area, those suburban communities just outside one of America's fastest-growing major cities. Now, on paper, this should have been the safest of safe Republican seats. This is a district that Donald Trump carried by approximately 17 points in the last presidential election. 17 points. Let that sink in for a moment. That is not a competitive district. That is not a swing district. That is not even a lean Republican district that you might worry about in a challenging year. That is the kind of margin that makes political operatives on both sides write a race off before it even gets started.
We're going to start with a big political shift in Tarrant County. This is over State Senate District 9, the seat there that is being talked about, honestly, around the country. Over the weekend, you may know by now, Democrat Taylor Remett defeating Republican Lee Wamgans. Here's a look at why this is notable, though. State Senate Seat 9 covers almost half of Tarrant County. It was previously held by Republican Kelly Hancock until he left to become the state's interim comptroller. Well, for the last 30 years, the history is important here. This seat has had a Republican representative. 2024, President Donald Trump won the district by 17 percentage points. Ion Politics reporter Jack Fink today in our Dallas newsroom. So the first question, and the obvious one, what are Democrats and Republicans all saying about this race's impact when we look forward to the midterm elections November?
Well, Doug, Tarrant County's Republican Party chairman says State Senate District 9 is still solidly Republican, and he predicts they will win this seat back in November. But Tarrant County's Democratic Party chairwoman is predicting not only will Democrats hold on to this seat, but that Tarrant County will experience a blue wave in November, similar to what Dallas County saw back in 2006.
That is what safe Republican territory looks like in the polling data and on the electoral maps. Except something went wildly wrong for the GOP, because when the votes were counted, it turned out that this district was not safe at all, not even close to safe, not within 10 points of safe. Democrat Taylor Remett won that race by roughly 14 points. I need you to really sit with that number for a second, because it tells an extraordinary story. A Democratic victory by 14 points in a district that Trump carried by 17 points just a short time earlier. That is a swing of more than 30 points toward Democrats in a single election cycle. 30 points in Texas in a district that has been reliably Republican for years and years. And the Republican candidate who lost was not some unknown accidental nominee who stumbled into the race at the last minute. She was Lee Wamgans, a conservative activist and explicitly MAGA-aligned candidate who was personally endorsed by Trump himself. The former and current president of the United States put his name and his political credibility directly on the line in this contest. He sent out at least 2 messages to his supporters in the closing days of the race, urging them to back her. He made her the test case for his brand's continued strength. And his candidate still lost by 14 points in his own territory.
Democratic upset in a Texas state Senate election runoff. Late last night, Democrat Taylor Remett was declared the winner over Republican Lee Wamgans by double digits in the state's deep red 9th district that President Trump won by 17 points in 2024. Remett is a 33-year-old local union leader and first-time candidate whose race caught outsized attention after he overperformed in November's election, triggering the runoff. Remit has since received a surge of support from Democratic groups, including the DNC. It's also another loss for President Trump, who posted on Truth Social just before the runoff. Lee Wamsgans, a Republican running for the state Senate in the suburbs of Fort Worth, Texas, will be a great candidate and has my complete and total endorsement. Jackie, Eugene.
That is not a bad night. That is not a close call that broke the wrong way. That is a statement. A loud, clear, unmistakable 14-point statement from voters in Trump's own backyard saying something has fundamentally changed. And because one political disaster apparently wasn't enough for one evening, the same night, a Democrat also won a Houston area U.S. House special election, which means Republicans woke up the next morning with their already dangerously thin House majority cut down even further to 218 seats against 214 for Democrats with 3 vacancies still outstanding. That is a margin of 4 seats in a House of Representatives, where every single vote on every single piece of legislation matters, where losing a handful of members to illness or travel or disagreement can tank a bill, where the entire legislative agenda of the Trump administration is riding on keeping every Republican in line every single time. And that margin just got squeezed again because of what happened in Texas. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, a Republican and a loyal one, came out and called the result a wake-up call.
In your Eye on Politics tonight, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is warning Texas Republicans straight away that if they don't unite this November behind their single winning nominee, whoever that's going to be for U.S. Senate, they risk handing that seat over to Democrat James Tallarico.
So, folks, this is real.
The lieutenant governor called out Senator John Cornyn and Attorney General Ken Paxton, who are battling each other to win the Republican primary runoff on May 26th.
We have one nasty race, and I'm just going to call it for what it is, for the U.S. Senate, and it troubles me. And I'm not blaming Cornyn, I'm not blaming Paxton. I can blame both of them. But I wish they'd spend the next 5 weeks or 6 weeks, quite frankly, running positive ads on why they should be elected, because it's not helping our party by tearing each other apart.
He said Republicans cannot take anything for granted in the upcoming elections. And when a senior Republican official in Texas is using that kind of language, when the people who have been winning comfortably for years are suddenly talking about not taking things for granted, that tells you something enormous about where this party actually is right now beneath the surface of the public confidence they project. Now, let's be honest about what Trump's team is going to try to tell you about this result. They will say it was a low turnout special election, and those are always unpredictable. They will say the candidate was not perfect and that a better candidate would have won. They will say one race does not define a trend and that Texas is still Texas, and Republicans will be just fine when the big elections roll around in November. And look, I want to be fair here. Some of those arguments are not completely without merit. Special elections are genuinely weird. Turnout dynamics and off-cycle races are genuinely different from general elections. Candidates matter enormously. Local issues matter. All of that is true and real. But here is why those arguments do not fully hold up when you look at what actually happened in this race, and why the 30-point swing is the number that really matters above all the other noise. A 30-point swing is not a fluke. It is not the result of a bad candidate or low turnout or some local issue that happened to break funny. A 30-point swing in a single election cycle from Trump plus 17 to Democrat plus 14 is a structural signal. It means that something in the underlying political environment in that district changed significantly and rapidly. When you look at where this district is located, suburban Fort Worth, the kind of community where you have college-educated voters, suburban women, people who might have voted Republican for years but have been quietly uncomfortable with the direction of the party, you start to understand what that signal is actually measuring. These are exactly the kinds of voters who have been drifting away from Republicans in suburban areas across the country since 2016 and accelerating that drift in recent years. And now they are doing it in Texas, in what was supposed to be the safe heartland of Trump country. And that is a very different story than Republicans losing ground in places they always knew were competitive. Think about what this district represents strategically. The Fort Worth suburbs are not Philadelphia. They are not Atlanta. They are not Phoenix. These are communities that the Republican Party has counted on as reliable base territory for a very long time. Communities where Democrats did not even bother being competitive because the margins were so consistently lopsided. And now in a race where Trump put his name personally on the line, where the candidate was explicitly marketed as the MAGA choice, where the former and current president of the United States personally appealed to his voters to show up, the Republican lost by 14 points. That is not just a bad night. That is a data point that every Republican strategist in the country is now staring at very carefully and asking themselves a version of the same question. If this can happen in the Fort Worth suburbs of Texas in a seat that was supposed to be untouchable, what does that mean for every other district we have been assuming is safe? And the Houston House race makes it even worse, because that one is not a state legislative seat in a local district. That is a federal seat. A seat in the United States House of Representatives, and Democrats won it. Which means that in one single evening, in one single state, Republicans lost ground in both the state legislature and the U.S. Congress. And the House majority, which was already operating at a margin that makes every day feel like a potential crisis, got squeezed down to 4 seats. 4. And here is the thing about a 4-seat majority that people who are not deep into congressional politics sometimes underestimate. It is not really a majority in any practical sense. It is a situation where any 3 or 4 Republicans who decide to break with leadership on any given vote for any reason, whether it is principle or politics or pressure from their districts, can kill legislation, where the entire governing agenda of the Trump administration is functionally hostage to the preferences of the most reluctant members of the Republican conference. And every time a special election goes the wrong way, every time that number ticks down, the leverage of those reluctant members goes up. That is the math. And it is not comfortable math for anyone trying to run the Republican agenda in Washington right now. Let's talk about what is actually driving this shift, because the numbers tell you that something is moving, but they do not by themselves tell you why. And the why is really where the interesting political analysis lives. When you look at the pattern of Republican underperformance in suburban areas since recent years, and this Texas result fits squarely into that pattern, a few things keep coming up consistently across every geography where this shift is happening. Suburban college-educated voters, particularly women, have been moving away from the Republican Party at a rate that has alarmed GOP strategists for years. This is not a new observation. It is not something that 1 or 2 pollsters noticed and inflated into a trend. It is documented, consistent, and visible across states and districts that have very little else in common except their suburban character. It showed up when Democrats flipped the House largely on the back of suburban revolts in places nobody expected. It showed up in 2020 when the Democratic nominee outperformed previous Democratic numbers significantly in suburban counties across the Sun Belt. It showed up in 2022 when Republicans badly underperformed nearly every prediction going into the midterms, largely because the suburban drift continued in ways the party's models did not fully account for. And it is showing up again now, with even more force in territory that was supposed to be the last place it reached. And the common thread running through all of those cycles is consistent and clear. These voters who are not ideologically hardline on either side, who tend to care deeply about stability and institutional reliability and basic functional competence in government, have been consistently, repeatedly turned off by a style of politics that prioritizes confrontation, grievance, and culture war intensity over the bread-and-butter governance issues they actually care about most when they step into the voting booth. And here is the part that should make Republicans genuinely nervous about what comes next. Not the Texas result by itself, but what it suggests about the environment. The conditions that are producing this suburban drift are not getting better for the party. If anything, they are intensifying right now. The constant drama, the legal battles, the daily controversies that dominate the news cycle, the style of politics that fires up the hardcore base but makes suburban moderates actively uncomfortable. None of that has quieted down or shown any sign of quieting down. The economy has been producing real anxiety for middle-class families in the kinds of communities that decide elections. People who are watching their costs go up and looking for someone to blame. Gas prices connected to foreign policy decisions are hitting people at real gas stations in real towns every week. Healthcare costs, housing costs, grocery bills, all of the things suburban families talk about around the kitchen table are generating stress that feeds directly into dissatisfaction with whoever is running the government. And the legislative and political environment in Washington has been generating exactly the kind of intense, divisive coverage that keeps politics front of mind for precisely the voters who tend to drift away from incumbents when they start paying close attention. So, the political environment that produced this Texas result is not a one-time aberration that corrects itself by the next election. It is a persistent, worsening condition. And persistent conditions produce consistent electoral outcomes over time. Inconsistent electoral outcomes across enough districts and enough states produce a wave. That is the thing Republican strategists are staring at right now and trying very hard not to say out loud in public, because saying it out loud makes it more real and more likely to become a self-fulfilling prophecy among donors and candidates who are already nervous. So let's lay this all the way out and talk about what this Texas result actually means in practical terms for the House majority, for the upcoming midterms, for Trump's political standing, and for the broader question of where American politics is heading over the next couple of years. Because the Texas race is the headline, but the implications are the story, and I want to make sure you leave with a clear understanding of all of the things that really matter here. The first thing you need to understand is that a 30-point swing in a Trump plus 17 district is not an isolated event. It is part of a pattern that has been building for years and is now reaching a level of visibility that Republicans cannot ignore or explain away. We have seen this movie before. In 2018, Republicans lost the House in a midterm wave, driven substantially by suburban voters turning against the party. In 2022, Democrats significantly outperformed expectations again in suburban and ex-urban areas, preventing what many predicted would be a massive Republican wave. And now, in a special election in Texas, in a district that should have been a layup, the same dynamic is showing up again with even more force. The through line in all of these cycles is consistent. Suburban voters, especially college-educated ones, especially women, have been systematically drifting away from the Republican Party at a pace and consistency that suggests this is not a temporary move. It is a realignment, a slow, steady structural realignment that is reshaping what the electoral map looks like in states that Republicans have taken for granted for a very long time. And Texas is supposed to be the last place that realignment reaches. The fact that it is reaching there now visibly, measurably in the form of a 30-point swing, is a 5-alarm signal that the party's geographic assumptions need to be fundamentally revisited. Trump's personal involvement in this race makes the result significantly more damaging than a typical special election loss would be. When a candidate loses a race the president was not invested in, when a local candidate goes down in a low-profile contest, the party can manage the narrative. They can say it was a local issue, a candidate problem, a turnout quirk. They can minimize it and move on. But Trump did not stay out of this one. He put his brand on it explicitly. He sent messages to his supporters. He personally endorsed the candidate and publicly urged his voters to show up for her. He made this race, at least symbolically, a test of his political pull in his own territory, and he lost it by 14 points. And that is a different kind of loss. That is not a race the party can quietly attribute to a weak candidate or a local anomaly. That is a race where the president's direct intervention failed to move the needle enough to win, in a district he dominated by 17 points just over a year before. That gap between his 2024 performance in the district and the special election result is the number that defines the political danger here. And it is a number that is now in the public record and will be cited in every conversation about Republican vulnerability between now and November. The House majority situation is now genuinely precarious, in a way that has real consequences for the Trump legislative agenda on a daily basis. A 4-seat majority in the House of Representatives is not really a governing majority. It is a situation where leadership is permanently 1 or 2 defections away from a legislative crisis on any given bill. And the dynamic that creates is one where the most ideologically rigid members of the conference, the ones least willing to compromise, the ones most willing to play hardball, have disproportionate leverage over every single vote because leadership needs them, because the math requires them. And when you have a narrow majority and a shrinking one, when special elections keep nicking away at it, that leverage problem gets worse with every loss. Republicans who are facing competitive districts are going to be watching these Texas numbers very carefully, and some of them are going to start making the calculation that the politically safe move is not to lock arms with an administration whose brand just cost the party 30 points of margin in a safe Texas district. That kind of individual political calculation made by enough members in enough competitive seats is exactly how thin majorities turn into no majority at all. The one that pulls everything together into the biggest possible frame is the question of what this means for the upcoming elections as a whole. Because Democrats are not being subtle about how they intend to use this result. They are saying loudly, publicly, and with a level of confidence they have not had in a while, that no Republican seat is safe this cycle. And while that is partly messaging and partly spin, and partly the normal optimism of a party that just had a good night, the underlying argument they are making is not without foundation. If a Democrat can win by 14 points in a district Trump carried by 17, what does that mean for districts Trump carried by 8 or by 5 or by 3? What does it mean for the genuinely competitive seats in Arizona and Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that will decide control of the House and potentially the Senate? The honest answer, the one that Republican strategists are sitting with right now, is that it means those races are going to be harder than they already expected. It means the playing field is wider than they planned for. It means they are going to have to spend money and time and political capital defending territory they assumed they did not have to defend. And defending territory you assumed was safe is one of the most exhausting and expensive things a political party can do in an election cycle. It drains resources. It divides attention. It forces candidates to run on defense when they would rather be on offense. And it creates a narrative, a Texas-size, impossible-to-ignore narrative that the political wind has shifted and that Republicans are the ones running into it. So here is where we land. Trump personally backed a Republican in Texas. He put his name on the line. He sent out messages. He made the race a test of his pull in his own stronghold. And the Republican lost by 14 points. The House majority is down to 4 seats. Dan Patrick, a loyal Texas Republican, called it a wake-up call and said the party cannot take anything for granted. And Democrats are heading into the upcoming midterms with more confidence, more momentum, and a cleaner, simpler story to tell than they have had in years. The question now is whether this Texas result is the beginning of something larger, a real building wave that gradually reshapes the congressional map all the way through November, or whether Republicans manage to find a way to stabilize, adjust their message, and hold on to their majority by the skin of their teeth. That answer is not written yet. Political conditions change, candidates matter, unexpected events can reshape the environment in ways that nobody predicted. All of that is real and true. But the Texas numbers are not going to disappear. They are in the record now. They are going to be cited in every competitive race. They are going to show up in Democratic ads, from Georgia to Arizona to Pennsylvania. They are going to be the first thing reporters ask Republican candidates about when they show up to their district town halls. And the candidates in the competitive districts across the country that will decide control of the House and Senate are going to have to answer for them whether they want to or not. What happened in Texas was a warning shot, and the question every Republican running now has to answer is whether they heard it.